So tonight we are doing a financial aid presentation, and with me I have Margaret. She's from Lorain Community College. She is a financial aid specialist there. So she will kind of be running the majority of the presentation, but I will be around for any questions that you may have. And then we will stay after for any additional questions, more personal, that you could potentially have as well. So thank you for being here, and I'll let her go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much. As she said, I'm Margaret Cornish from Lorain County Community College. I've been in the financial aid office there about 7 years. My specialty there, I guess you could say, is verification, which some students will be selected to have to provide additional information once you complete your FAFSA, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But the presentation tonight is a little bit on how to fill out the FAFSA, and it's also a little bit on, I'm the parent of a high school senior, help me walk through this maze of how do I even start with financial aid, and once we fill out the FAFSA, then what happens, and just a lot of information. There's a lot of great information even on YouTube, and I have a completely different presentation on how to fill out the FAFSA line by line. But I hope to go through a lot of that here tonight with you. We could be here forever, but the idea is that we're out here in an hour. So I am more than happy to stay after to answer specific questions, because as you'll see during the presentation, there are times when people may have questions about, is my student a dependent or an independent student? Or, you know, if mom and dad aren't married or together, then what parent information do I use on the FAFSA? And a lot of very detailed questions that you may not want to raise your hand in the middle of 30 people and say, well, this is my situation. I'm more than happy to answer those more personal questions afterwards. So, this presentation was actually created by my financial aid director, and I did get an opportunity to hear her go through it, so I've got a little bit of an idea where she was coming from with all this. So she wanted to mention some things in addition to the FAFSA application. So the Ferpa, Federal Education Right and Privacy Act, is something that you'll be introduced to, and we always say it's kind of like the HIPAA is to the medical world, Ferpa is to the academic world. And your student, once they become a college student, they have certain rights that their academic record isn't shared with anybody but the student. So when your student gets to college, you'll probably want to speak with them about the opportunity that they may have to give permission at whatever college they decide to attend. Give permission to speak with someone besides themselves. So for example, if mom or dad or grandma or aunt or uncle or big sister is already, you know, wanting to know information to help them with their financial aid or know things like that, the student will probably have to sign some kind of a release or an authorization form in order to give you permission to speak with the financial aid office or the enrollment office or anything. So that's just something that we thought we'd bring up, so that the first time you call the financial aid office, I'm calling on behalf of my son or daughter and I want to know, and they're going to say, well, we can't tell you that. It's very frustrating, because a lot of times the parents are like, well, I'm paying the bill and the student is my dependent student. And we'll say, I know, but it's the student's private information that we can't share with you unless we have their permission. So just kind of a heads up that that may be something that's coming. So when you run into that, you'll know that you've heard about that before. So, the FAFSA application, and we just have some helpful tips. As I've sent I have three adult sons that are in their late 20s, early 30s, and so we've done the whole FAFSA college application thing, and it was super important to me to stay organized, to create a folder for every college that my student applied to. And my director, Carrie Short, is the director of financial aid at LCCC, has some great tips here for just staying organized as you go through this whole process. You probably, if you're a parent of a senior, you've probably already been getting a lot of mail that comes probably as a result of your student either doing the SAT, ACT, PSAT, whatever test they've taken. All of a sudden they get all kinds of good stuff in the mail about colleges. So I remember keeping folders for all that. Each college also has a federal school code that you wouldn't necessarily have to memorize or know, because on the Fasfa application you could look up schools by state and by city. But it's helpful to know the school code. If you do find it, you can include it in your information. And then once you are admitted to a student or to a college, the student should familiarize themselves with whatever student portal software that college uses. I know at LCCC it's called My Campus, and the students can log in and see their information, see their financial aid awards, see their class schedule, and also receive emails. And that's a really important thing to do once the student is admitted. Even before you make a decision, they may be getting emails and things you'll want to read. It says parents involve the student. I know when I sent my kids to school, I did the FAFSA, I did this, I did that. But now that I work in higher education, if a parent and a student come in together, most of the time I'm going to adjust my comments to the student, because it's really time for them to step up, be familiar with what their financial aid situation is, and just take the responsibility to navigate through a lot of this. Not that parents can't help, and not that we're not there to help. That's exactly why the staff at every college is there to help, and enrollment services, financial services, career services. We're there to help the student, because it can be quite a maze to navigate. But we want the student to be as involved as possible. So studentaid.gov is where we start to fill out all kinds of good stuff for college financial aid. It used to be that we would send you to fasfa.gov. If you type into a search engine fasfa.gov, it will redirect you now to studentaid.gov. The federal government has done a great job in the Department of Education of, instead of sending you to this website for student loans and this website for the FAFSA and this website for whatever else you may need information about, they really put it all together at studentaid.gov. And so there are a bunch of different menus, and we can even look at that a little bit on the next slide, about completing the FAFSA form, applying for loans, types of financial aid. There's a lot of great information to read, and then access to things that you may need to fill out for different forms of financial aid. The Fasfa application is the application for the federal Pell Grant and for the federal direct student loans. Separately from that, there are PLUS loans and graduate loans that parents can also fill out. We'll talk about that a little bit. Some colleges also offer a TEACH grant, and there are a couple other grants as well that we'll get into in a little bit. So a federal student aid ID is needed to sign your FAFSA. Think of it as a login and a password to get into the website, just like every other website that you log into. You probably have a huge list of logins and passwords. So the parent and the student are going to create their own federal student aid ID. You're going to create the login, you're going to create the password. I already had a question tonight, if I've got a set of twins, do I do a different federal student aid ID and a different FAFSA for each student? And the answer is yes. If mom and dad are married and together, then only one of you needs to create a federal student aid ID to sign your student's FAFSA. You don't need both parents to sign the student's FAFSA, just it needs one parent's signature on it. You're going to want to keep this information in a secure place, because that's your signature for all the federal forms that you're going to fill out for the length of time that the student is in college. So that's going to stay the same the whole length of time that the student is in college. You're going to register, if you have them, a mobile phone number and an email address. It's super helpful if you do register those, and it'll ask you to verify them. It'll ask you to verify the cell phone number by sending a text, and then you respond. It'll ask you to verify the email address by, they'll send you a secure code to your email, and then you put the secure code back in, and that verifies them. That's super helpful if you ever do forget your FSA ID, because it's easy to reset a password or a login if you have verified your cell phone or your email. If you haven't, it becomes more difficult to reset, and it's not impossible, but it's just more difficult. There is a 1-800 number that people have been very successful in actually getting a real person on the phone to talk to someone from federal student aid to reset their information, but it's easier just to keep it in a secure place. I know when I did FAFSAs for my kids, I always, I had a FAFSA folder where I would keep the documentation that I used for that year's FAFSA, and then that's where I kept my PIN number and the student's PIN number as well. Schools do not have access to your FSA ID, so you couldn't walk into LCCC and say, hey, can you help me? I can't remember my FSA ID. We would say, I have no idea, because that's between you and the federal government. It's a federal student aid ID. If you've done a FAFSA, if you've had a student who has gone to college, let's say more than 6 or 7 years ago, you may remember that you signed the student's FAFSA with a 4-digit PIN number. If you have that floating around and you want to put that in, that's what I ended up doing. The 15-16 year was the first year that you could use that for student aid ID. And I put in my 4-digit PIN number, and it recognized who I was, and then let me continue the process. Obviously, you don't need to do that, but if you want to, you can. So moving on from the federal student aid ID. What am I going to do with this ID? Well, you're going to sign the FAFSA with it. If you end up getting student loans as a student or parent loans as a parent, you'll need to use that federal student aid to sign into studentaid.gov to sign the master promissory note, to do the entrance loan counseling. That's the basic things that it's used for. All right, so this is the opening page of, do you want to start your FAFSA? And you say, start here. So most of you will probably do the start here, new to the FAFSA process. And you would click that. Again, it's on the federal studentaid.gov website under the apply for aid up there in the red circle. This screen will come up and you click the start here button. The cool thing is that in subsequent years, you can click that you're a returning user. And so subsequent years, it's much easier, much less time to get your FAFSA filled out, because the student information, parent information, you know, name, address, phone number, social, that kind of good stuff is already in there. You know, what high school did you go to? All the preliminary information will already be in there the next time you do it. So this takes a little bit longer the first time. So if you are the proud parent of a high school senior, you can actually already do the FAFSA for the 22-23 school year. It became available last Friday. So what you'll need to do with the FAFSA, you will need 2020 tax information. So those are the taxes that you just filed last, this year in April. What's interesting is even if you do the FAFSA next summer, you will still use 2020 information. And that can be a little bit confusing because people say, well, wait a minute, I just finished my 2021 taxes. And we have to explain, well, since the 22-23 FAFSA opened October 1st of 2021, no one has done their 2021 taxes yet. So they need to keep it consistent that you're going to use your 2020 tax information no matter when you complete this particular year's FAFSA. I'll talk a little bit about the data retrieval tool, which is a really cool thing that they've incorporated into the FAFSA. If you have done a tax return, there are certain situations where you can't use the data retrieval tool. We'll do that. We'll go over that in a minute. But if it's available to you, we suggest that you do use the IRS data retrieval tool to import your tax information into your FAFSA. It's super easy, and it puts all the numbers exactly where they belong, and it's awesome. It's a great way to verify your tax information. I'll talk a little bit about verification in a minute because that's something that I know a little bit about, and it happens to maybe 25% of students who do a FAFSA, so it's something that'll probably come up for you. So again, student 2020 tax information, if they say they worked a summer job last year, ended up doing a tax return, or they worked during the school year part-time, and they did a tax return, you'll want to have the return and the W-2s or 1099s. And you'll also want current asset information. So basically bank account balance, checking and savings account. College savings plan, only if it's in the student's name is it considered a student asset. Most of the college savings plans, if the rule of thumb we use is if the student needs you to access those funds, it's probably in your name or Grandma and Grandpa's name or whoever set up the college savings plan. That would be considered a parent asset if it's in the parent's name. So if the student did not have any income, and well, I should separate that out. If they didn't do a tax return in 2020, that's fine. You just put on, you click the radio button, will not file. But say they had a job, earned like $500, earned some money but didn't have enough income that they had to do a tax return. They still put will not file, but there is a place to put, the income that you had for that year, and you can just fill in that box. Parent information, same thing. You'll want to gather the tax return, 1099s, W-2s, that kind of thing. Parents' current asset information. Some of the things you won't see up there, you do not need to include the value of your home. That's not considered an asset for FAFSA purposes. If you have a primary residence and then you have rental homes, those are considered assets as part of a business. You also will not see any funds that are in retirement accounts, so IRAs, 401ks, Roth IRAs, 403Bs, that kind of thing. You won't put any of that asset information on the FAFSA. All right, so using the IRS data retrieval tool, I mentioned that briefly, links directly to the IRS. It won't let you use the IRS data retrieval tool if you have parents of a dependent student who are married filing separately, or who just got married since the 2020 tax year ended. So let's say since last December 31st. So in other words, you didn't do a married filing joint tax return into 2020. You weren't even part of the same household yet, but you got married this year. The IRS does not have the capability to pull two different tax return information and put it into one student's FAFSA. So we'll have to work on adding numbers together if that's the situation. Or if it's if each parent files married filing separately, we'll have to work on pulling information together and adding some numbers together. Or if the student or parent filed a foreign tax return. That's not possible to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So here's a question that comes up a lot of the time. Who is the parent on the FAFSA? So typically the parent means the legal, either the biological parent or you've adopted the student, you're the legal parent or step parent. Grandparents are never a parent on the FAFSA unless they legally adopted the student as their own child. If biological parents are separated or not married and don't live in the same household, we say the parent that provides 51% or more of the support should be reported on the FAFSA. If biological parents are not married but do live in the same household, there is an option on the FAFSA to put marital status of your parents as living together, and both parent incomes are included together on the FAFSA. If you have a situation where parents aren't together and you've got joint custody of the student and you say, well, we kind of split it 50-50 and it's pretty much 50-50, we do say the one who the student lived with more than The other, over the past 12 months, if there's a way to differentiate who had the student, one more day when there's an odd number of days in the year, that should be the student or the parent whose information is included on the FAFSA. If you have biological parents who aren't married to each other anymore and one of them is remarried, if the student uses that parent information on the FAFSA, they must also include the information for the parent's new spouse. So say they did a married filing jointly tax return, you would include, all that parent income on the FAFSA. But what if there's always extenuating circumstances? Every college has staff in their office, in their financial aid office, to make special allowances for whatever situation might be atypical for a student. So if we have a student, for example, who does not have really a relationship with either parent, it's been unsafe, or they've been in foster care, or they, have been living with grandma, but it's not a, legal custody, guardianship arrangement. A dependency appeal is something that your financial aid professional has an opportunity to do. You'll want to check with the financial aid office at the school that your student is planning on attending to see how they handle that. It's probably a form and a letter of explanation from the student, what their relationship is with their biological parents, why there isn't really any contact with them, and they may ask for some documentation or some support from the student's guidance counselor or another professional or something like that. Schools handle that differently, but every financial aid office has someone in their office who can make these kind of decisions and work with you on that. The other thing the financial aid offices can do is, what if my financial situation is completely different from the way it was in 2020? We all know 2020 was just an insane year. Maybe your tax return reflects that your income was lower in 2020 and your income's higher now. If that's the case, you don't need to do anything. You go with the lower income from 2020, put it on your FAFSA, that's what your financial aid is going to be based on. But if 2020 was okay for you, and since then things have changed dramatically, or if things change next spring before your student starts school, you also want to get in touch with the financial aid office, because again, they've got professionals who can respond to special circumstances in your life, and again, they're probably going to have you fill out a form, estimate what your income is going to be for the upcoming school year, provide any documentation of unemployment, loss of a spouse, loss of child support. Some things that are on your tax return as income may have changed. For example, what if during 2020 you took some money out of your retirement account and it was taxable on your tax return? You're like, but that was a one-time only thing. I'm not going to do that every year. Well, that would warrant a special circumstance, that was a one-time only payment, that's not part of my annual income. This is really what my annual income is. You want to bring that to the attention of the financial aid professionals at the school where your student's going to go, because they can make adjustments to your FAFSA. So in bold print on the bottom of this slide, let's not have you make the changes to your FAFSA. You're going to fill out the student's FAFSA exactly the way they asked for it, with the way things were in 2020 as far as income goes. But if things have changed since then, you're going to want to bring the documentation that this financial aid office asks for, and the financial aid staff will make adjustments to your FAFSA and see if we could get the student qualified for some more financial aid. And again, all of these I can answer questions about either with the group or individually at the end of the presentation. So common errors on the FAFSA, and this is where being involved in verification, I see a lot of this. So I mentioned verification before. The federal government typically selects maybe 25% of FAFSAs just randomly for students to provide the verifying information to the Student Financial Aid Office. It's kind of just a way for them to audit the information that goes on FAFSAs nationwide. For the 21-22 school year that we're in now, for the first time ever, the the government has completely relaxed a lot of those verification requirements, which was just amazing. We do not anticipate that being a thing for the 22-23 school year. In fact, the word from the Department of Education right now is that they're not going to relax those requirements. It'll go back to the way it always was. So basically, if you're selected for verification, they want to verify household size, how many people in the household, and they want to verify the income information. If you use the IRS data retrieval tool to import your tax information into your FAFSA, it's already considered verified. So the school will not ask for copies of your tax returns unless you've done an amended tax return since you filed your 2020 taxes. Then they'll ask for the amended return because unfortunately, IRS data retrieval tool doesn't have the capability to pull in amended tax return information. So if you've done an amended tax return for 2020 or end up doing one in the next year, your original tax return information is going to be pulled into the FAFSA using the data retrieval tool. And then if the student's selected for verification, you'll have to provide a copy of the amended return. So along with that, reporting taxes withheld on your W-2 instead of the actual taxes paid. So I know it's hard to see from up here, but I actually have a 2020 tax return, and the taxes, the actual line, 24 on the tax return is the taxes that you owed the government, which may be different from what was withheld on your W-2s. So a lot of times we'll see people put the number from their W-2, this is how much federal income tax I had withheld. That is not how much tax that you necessarily owed that year. So you want to pull that information off of the tax return. And as you fill out the FAFSA, it's really helpful. It'll say, look at line such and such on your tax return and type the number here. Although if you use the data retrieval tool, you'll just skip over that part because when you come to that line, it'll say, transferred from the IRS. Then you go to the next line, transferred from the IRS. Forgetting to sign the FAFSA is a common mistake people make. Both the parent and the student need to sign it. Forgetting to report untaxed income, such as child support. Reporting the parent tax information in the student section of the FAFSA. I've probably seen that about 7 or 8 times so far this year. And your FAFSA will come to us with a code on it that says, your financial aid administrator may contact you to possibly correct something with your FAFSA. So as you're filling out the FAFSA, a lot of times it'll say you and your. And just remember that when it uses the word you, it's referring to the student. And so the parent might sit down and be doing the FAFSA, your income, yada. And before you know it, you've got all the parent information in the student section and in the parent section. And if the parent has a decent income, it will completely knock your student out of eligibility for the Pell Grant because the formula will think your student makes a lot more money than they did. Adding the wrong school code, I don't see that very often. I guess what we see, forgetting to add any school code would be a problem because basically the federal government is collecting this information in order to pass it on to the schools. You have an opportunity to send the FAFSA up to 10 different colleges. So one of the questions we get is, what if my student hasn't decided where they want to go? Should I fill out the FAFSA yet? And my answer would be yes, because if you have an idea of a couple schools the student is interested, go ahead and fill out the FAFSA, put the schools on there. Again, you don't necessarily have to know the 6-digit school code. You can look up the schools by state and by city and by name. And it'll suggest a few things, like, is this the one you want? And you say, yeah, that's the one that I meant to choose. And after the Department of Education has processed your FAFSA, their job really is to send it to the school, so the school can determine how much financial aid you might be eligible for. If you decide later that you want to add another school to the FAFSA, it's not difficult at all to go back into a FAFSA application that's already been processed, click that you want to make a correction, scroll through to the, page where you add the schools and add another school, and then go to the end and sign and submit it again. It's not a big deal to do that. So don't wait until you've got, a list of 10 schools that we really want to send this. Go ahead and do it and send it, and if you want to add a school later. We do find that some students, I got a phone call from a mom, I want to say like the week before classes started. They had moved their student in the dorm of a four-year school here in Ohio, and the daughter called and said, I think I made a horrible mistake. And she was a scholarship recipient at LCCC, and the week before school started, they added LCCC to their FAFSA, moved their daughter out of the dorm, got her signed up at LC. Now, granted, that's not common, but it's something LCCC can accommodate. A four-year school might not do that for you, because they pretty much want to know by May 1st what school you're selecting. And I remember that date, and that's still pretty much the date. They want to know by May 1st in order to have you put a deposit down on a dorm and to sign up for a summer orientation, get your student schedule, all that kind of stuff during the summer. So those are some of the common mistakes with a FAFSA. I should mention the last one, omitting parent information entirely. If you do that and don't put a reason, and we'll go through those, the FAFSA will be quote-unquote rejected, but that's okay, because the student or the school will still get the FAFSA, just in a rejected status. And that's when the student can go to the financial aid office and say, this is why I didn't put parent information on. Can I fill out paperwork for a dependency appeal?
How do they know wrong parent information? Like if you, in the case of like step-parents, parents that are separated?
The only way that I typically find that out is if they're selected for verification, and the verification worksheet lists student, mom, stepdad, brother, sister, and then I look at those names, and then I go to the FAFSA, and I'm like, wait a minute, this name is not the same, like they put dad on the FAFSA and mom and stepdad on the worksheet. I'm like, okay, wait a minute, who do you live with, and which one of these needs to be corrected? That's really the only way that I'll figure it out. Sometimes we'll also figure out that, they live with mom and mom is remarried, but they just put mom's tax information on the FAFSA. Then they're selected for verification. Well, who's in the household? Mom, stepdad, student, brother, sister. We're like, well, you just put mom's tax information on your FAFSA. Did her husband file a tax return in that year? Were they, even if they weren't married, but it's different school. Here's the situation. Different schools will handle this differently. If you do the FAFSA now, and then mom or dad gets married like this fall or next spring, and your student's selected for verification, so you've got another adult in the household, schools differ on whether they will then want to add that extra parent's information to the FAFSA. At LCCC, we typically do not. If it was correct at the time the FAFSA was completed, like, fine, we'll just go with that. And then the next school year, the other parent's information, we'll probably do a married family joint tax return, and then we'll go on the FAFSA. All right, after you hit the submit button. So this is the confirmation page at the end of a FAFSA. So you'll notice I haven't really gone through line by line, but I've talked about some of the information that is required on the FAFSA. What happens next? The confirmation page lists the schools that you're sending it to and gives you a little bit of information about it. It'll list what they call an EFC, an expected family contribution, and it's a 6-digit number that's here a measure of how much you can contribute. It's not necessarily a dollar amount. This isn't saying that, oh, we think you can contribute $2,416 to your student's education. It's kind of ballpark-ish, and that number is used to determine Pell Grant eligibility. And eligibility, some schools may use it to determine eligibility for other, scholarships or whatever. As a result of that number, they do give you a Pell Grant estimate, student loan estimate, and direct you to some other websites that you can, other federal tax benefits. They refer to the American Opportunity Tax Credit. That's a tax credit on your tax return for parents of dependent students, that the parent can take a tax credit, and the amount of that tax credit depends on a couple different things, but they give you that information to read. If you don't see an EFC listed, the EFC equals, and this is blank, probably something was left off of your FAFSA. Probably it wasn't signed. That's the main reason we don't see, they don't calculate an EFC if it's not signed by both student and parent. You will get a student aid report. This usually goes to the student's email address that they put on the FAFSA. And the student aid report, after the FAFSA is processed, has a lot of great information in it. And it will say whether the student is selected for verification. It will say if there's some issues with the FAFSA. It'll have a lot of great information in it for you to read. So again, an explanation of the EFC. That Carrie did put in the presentation of, it is the amount the students and their family are expected to contribute. It's more of a gauge, a rough estimate of what the family might be able to contribute. But it's basically a tool that's used to determine Pell Grant eligibility and federal direct student loan eligibility. And some colleges might use it to determine eligibility for other scholarships and aid that they have. So, this is the different types of awards you may be offered. A merit scholarship from the institution is not necessarily based upon FAFSA information. If it's a merit scholarship based on scholastic or athletic achievement in high school, then that's something that the school has offered you, not contingent upon your financial aid need. The federal Pell Grant is based on need. The FSEOG grant, Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, that's something, the FAFSA is the application for that. For example, at LCCC, we get a set amount of dollars of that grant funding each year. And it's up to us to how we allocate those dollars. And I know at LC, we allocate them first to, zero EFC Pell eligible students on a first come, first served basis. And if after students that meet that criteria are awarded and then there are still funds in the fund, we will extend it to another group of students. So different colleges have different criteria for awarding the FSEOG grant, but so it's not something the student can say, oh, I want this much of that money. We typically will offer, $400 a semester to full-time students and $200 to part-time students, but colleges all handle that differently. The Ohio College Opportunity Grant is also a state grant that you can apply for some majors. Federal work study, it'll ask you on the FAFSA if you're interested in work study. You can say yes, no, or I don't know. And saying I don't know doesn't necessarily preclude you from not getting a work study job. Work study jobs are offered on campus or sometimes maybe off campus with a local organization. And they're great for getting experience in your career field. We use work study students as student employees in our financial aid office. In fact, lots of offices on campus offer work study jobs, in the library or a different, maybe a nonprofit organization in the community. And what that is you work to earn a paycheck, but your paycheck is being paid by the Federal Department of Education. There are federal dollars that are paying your paycheck. And then the subsidized and unsubsidized student loans, you'll need the FAFSA to fill out to apply for those. Plus loans, because there's a limit to the dollar amount that undergraduate students can get each year for the student loans. If the cost of attendance at your chosen school is higher than that, the financial aid office might ask you if the parent wants to also take out a loan to help finance students' education. And then private loans, typically a FAFSA isn't necessary, but a better credit score would be used just as the same as you were taking out a loan for a car or a mortgage or something like that. There's just kind of a summary of the different types of aid. We want to get as many gift types of aid as we can. And I'll talk a little bit more about scholarships. This is typically what used to be called an award letter. Now we say it's a financial aid offer notification. It may come written and sent in the mail, or it may be available through the student portal of the college you select. At LCCC, it's actually available through the student portal. We don't print and mail these to students. So that's why we suggest, keeping up on emails and what's on the student portal. So there are things included. I like how she has, it's not your bill. It's a summary cost of attendance. So obviously tuition, room and board are things that are exact charges on your student account. Other things included in the cost of attendance, which every school has to provide their cost of attendance to the federal government, includes things like transportation, books, personal expenses, maybe technology. So a lot of times that bottom line that you see there, the red circle is $26,000, that might not be exactly how much you're going to end up paying out of pocket or with grants and scholarships for that particular college, but it is their quote-unquote cost of attendance. And a school will try to meet all of your financial needs up to their cost of attendance by awarding grants and scholarships and loans and that kind of thing. So some of the things that I just mentioned that go into cost of attendance, tuition fees, room and board are kind of set costs. The ones on the bottom are more estimated expenses, like at LC, for room and board. Since we don't have on-campus housing, we do a lot of information about, how much does it cost to live in the area, average mortgage payment, average rent payment in the area, and that kind of thing. So kind of estimate that. So for a four-year school where you're living on campus, those fees on top are pretty much set, and then fees on the bottom, those are more adjustable. You might get your books at the school library, or you might get them on check.com, or you might find a student who took that class last semester and you can borrow the book. Personal expenses and transportation obviously vary a lot as well as how far away you go to school, whether you're going to commute to school, if you live on campus and don't have a vehicle. Like back in the day, I didn't have a vehicle on campus for 4 years. So I had a lot of transportation costs, other than I went to an out-of-state college from where I grew up. So, got the cost of transportation back and forth. But so to finance out-of-pocket costs that aren't covered by grants or scholarships, the work study, a lot of schools have payment plans that let you break up your tuition over the course of 3 or 4 months. A 529 plan, if you've got a 529 plan for your student, you want to check with the provider to determine how to get funds from the plan to the school. They typically will not go through the financial aid office, they'll go directly to, it's either the bursar's office, student accounts office, accounts receivable office, whatever office on campus takes care of student payments. Outside scholarships. Definitely want to have you become familiar with the Lorraine County Community Foundation. Peoplewhocare.org is their web address. I've seen a lot of students at LCCC get scholarships through the Lorraine County Community Foundation, through local churches, local ethnic organizations, from where their parents work. There's a couple companies, even where the students work. McDonald's provides tuition scholarships. We get checks from, ISTS Incorporated for, McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell. Some of these fast food places will give scholarships to students. It's pretty cool. Parent Plus loans, obviously, is one way. We at LCCC really kind of try to discourage loans, but only because our cost of attendance is so low that really on an average, if you have no outside help at all, you're probably looking at about $2,500 for a semester, maybe $5,000 for the year. So between potential grants, scholarships, maybe the student works part-time, hopefully you can kind of finance the first 2 years of their college without loan. But at other schools, that's definitely sometimes not an option to pay as you go, unless you just take a limited number of credit hours and kind of pay as you go, which isn't a bad idea in the long run to not have all these loans. But you can also do private loans through Chase or Sallie Mae, Discover, Wells Fargo. Those are the main companies I've seen where we call it an alternative loan because it's an alternative to the federal direct student loans, but you will need decent credit to do that. You kind of love the cat, Carrie's a cat lover, so. All right, so now that you've done your FAFSA, you've read all the information that's come in the mail and through the email, and you finally made a decision on what school you want to go to. So go get that folder. Start reading in detail all the information they've sent you about how to maybe accept your student awards. Sign a Ferpa release if you as the student want mom or dad to be able to speak to the financial aid office about your account. You want to connect with the financial aid office. Decline other offers. I know with my guys, we they were offered student loans sometimes, and they had to go in and decline them. I will say at LCCC, if any of you are considering LCCC, if students do apply for a loan, we don't offer you a loan unless you tell us you want one. Most four-year schools with a higher cost of attendance will offer you a loan and you decline it if you don't want it. So really pay attention to your financial aid offers. If you have applied for a loan, you just want to make sure you go do the promissory note and the entrance counseling. And you want to watch for, mail and email from the student accounts, cashier's office, billing office, whatever your school calls it, and don't miss deadlines for payment. We don't have late fees or awful consequences for a little bit of a late payment. Did you remember one of my kids, it was due on a Friday afternoon, and I'm like, I'm going to pay that on Friday. Why pay it a day earlier, right? So something happened, I completely forgot, paid it at 6 o'clock on a Friday, 6 p.m., it was due at 5, and I ended up getting charged a late fee. I'm like, oh man, so I never did that again. So really pay attention to some of the dates payments are due, and maybe give yourself an extra day or two to pay it ahead of time so you don't end up in my situation. So common errors, where you say, no, I can't believe I did that. Not checking mail or email, not turning in documents that are asked for, forgetting to accept your aid, logging in the wrong role. That would probably mean logging into the Fasfa, and like I said, putting parent information in the student section, forgetting to do some of the things for your loans, waiting till the bill comes to file the FAFSA. That's not too uncommon, actually. But we always suggest, I tell students, and this is once you get on campus and get going. But really, let's say at the end of your fall semester, when it comes time for finals week and you're done with that last final, you know, we've all been there. If we've been to college, you're just like, I'm done. Thank goodness I'm done. I survived the semester. I survived my final. But I always tell students, please don't leave campus before, you know, for your break that's coming up without making sure that everything is in order for the semester coming up. You know, your financial aid award is showing, you haven't gotten any emails that say, you know, provide this to such and such an office. Just don't leave campus without knowing your bill is paid for the semester, your financial aid is good for the upcoming semester. I don't mind at all when people come to the window, you know, after they just finish their last final and say, just want to check that I'm good to go for spring. And I'm like, thank you so much for coming, and I can say, yes, you're good to go, or, you know, no, we're just waiting on this one document. I so appreciate students being on top of that, because when you come back, you know, to start the next semester, August and January are just super busy times for colleges. And so if you could get a lot of this done, you know, if you're going to a four-year school, you're going to want to get this done this fall and next spring, because next spring is when you're going to start getting, you know, your acceptance letters and your offers and, you know, all the information that's going to help you make the decision, where am I going to go to school in the fall. If you do go to a community college, you might have the option of, you know, you can extend that decision a little bit longer because we don't have those strict deadlines. But at least by June or July, you know, kind of have everything in order. Not that you can't get things done in August, but it's a super busy time and it just might take a little bit more time to get done what you want to get done. We just want to offer some last minute tips. Don't pay. If you somehow end up at a website where you are being charged to do your FAFSA, you're not at studentaid.gov. Don't ever pay to do scholarship applications for FAFSA. If you need help with your FAFSA, there's business cards over there for our office. You can come to LCCC. We will help you fill out your FAFSA no matter where you're going to college. We're there to help you fill out your FAFSA. That's what we do all day, and we can help you in about 20, 30 minutes to crank it out, and that we're happy to do that. Don't forget to turn in requested documentation, read all the emails. I know we've said that. Studentaid.gov is full of information. College Board, fastweb.com. I have not gone to Chief Scholar. I paid for school at FastWeb. And again, to fill out the FAFSA, you know, I've got a line-by-line PowerPoint presentation, but there are also great videos on federalstudentaid.gov and, you know, YouTube or wherever you can find videos on how to fill out the FAFSA. If you do have specific questions, yeah, we're more than happy to answer those for you. And I would be happy at this point to maybe answer some general questions in front of the group, and then if you have more specific personal questions about your particular situation, I'd be glad to take those privately, you know, when we're done. Yeah.
Do you apply for financial aid every semester?
Every school year.
Every school
I
year.
apologize for not making that clear. So some schools put the summer semester as a header. So at LC, it's summer, fall, spring. So summer of 2021, fall that we're in now. And next spring is the 21-22 school year. And we'll use the 21-22 FAFSA for that. We will start using this FAFSA we were talking about tonight, the 22-23 FAFSA. We'll start using it next summer. Now, some colleges are trailer schools where they go fall, spring, summer, and summer, you know, trails off. So you'll have to, if your student is going to summer classes, you'll have to figure out which it is. But once a year, you want to do the FAFSA once a year. What other questions do we have? All right.
Oh, there's one over there.
Yeah, I see two. Yeah.
So, during like the Fasfa application, we have to choose schools. What if, like she chooses some school or maybe she goes for something else but it wasn't added to the Fasfa, can that be later on when be added to it?
Yes.
Okay. Is
Yes.
that easy to fix or is it more of a process?
It's not difficult at all to add a school later. You go back into studentaid.gov, it'll say your FAFSA's already been processed, and you say to yourself, I know, and then you click, you want to make a correction, and you log back in, scroll through to the page where you add schools, add the new school, scroll to the end, resubmit it, and we usually say within 3 to 5 business days, the school gets the information that you put on the FAFSA. And in between there, I mean, it's crazy all the edit checks that the Department of Ed runs on their FAFSA. They run it against selective service if you're a male student, who needs to register between the ages of 18 and 26. They run it against Social Security Administration for the Social Security number or the parent's Social Security number. They run it against like 5 or 6 different departments in the federal government, and then they ship it to your school. Yeah, follow okay?
Does the order matter?
No, absolutely not. No, they don't ask you to rank them at all.
So when you go to fill it out initially, I'm sure it takes like a long time to fill it out. But if you're going for the second year, is everything basically saved and all you're basically changing is just like your federal info?
Yes.
So it like just remembers everything else, you're just making slight changes throughout it?
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, basically you're updating the income information.
It gets better.
Yeah, that's what
Well, my question was similar to what she just asked. If you're using the data retrieval tool, like how long does it take to fill this out completely, would you say?
For the very first time, if you've got all the information on the handout collected, and I just remember stressing out over it completely because I was so, I am kind of organized and I'm kind of a numbers person. I just remember being so diligent, I guess, in collecting all the information, taking a deep breath, sitting down at the computer and doing it. For the first time, I'd say an hour. Sit down at your computer for an hour if you've got everything gathered all together. It probably won't take that long. It actually takes about 10 minutes to set up the FSA ID because it asks you to set up 5 security questions, an alternate, email, an alternate phone number. So parent and student can be setting up an FSA ID kind of at the same time. That takes about 10 minutes. Once you've done that, the FAFSA, probably an hour max the first time if you're not familiar with it. Once you get familiar with it and you know your situation, probably by year 3 or 4, 20 minutes.
I do have to say, I remember filling it out as a student with my parents and it going from being very frustrating to like a breeze. So 100% agree with that.
Yeah, I saw someone over there first.
So on the FAFSA, they ask if the student is a first-year college, will be a first-year college student. If they've taken CCP courses, how would you answer that question?
That's a great question.
So there's 2 choices. There's one first-year college student with no college, or first-year college student with has taken college classes.
I remember, yeah, because the one says first year never attended, and then the next one says first year. So I guess that's a really good question. I might base it on the number of credit hours. So typically at most colleges, if a student has earned 24 credit hours, like 12 credit hours is considered a full-time student. So if you take 12 credit hours in the fall, 12 credit hours in the spring, you have completed your freshman year of college. So I'd say if they have 24 or more college credits, maybe you could put second year student, but if they're in that window of 0 to 24, I'd put first year attended before.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Would it matter?
So when you're filling out the FAFSA, you pretty much you get a decision right away? Or is that something you wait for?
Actually, yeah, the
That
one page,
one's
that
fine.
confirmation page, it is instant. It's like,
Okay.
oh, they did that big, calculation of all kinds of numbers that I put in, it does. You hit the submit button and bam, it does it instantly.
Thank you.
Whereas if you do, I've done hand calculations of EFCs, oh my goodness, it takes like 10 or 15 minutes, but it does it instantly for you. And someone said, does it matter what year you put for your college student? The big reason I can see between first year and every other year is a first year college student has a little bit lower student loan limits on the dollar amount that they can take out, but second year and above, there's a little bit higher loan limits. That's the main reason I can figure for students in this group, and that would make a difference. What else can I help with?
I just wanted to share really quick from just some of the visits that have been here with reps. For example, this week we had BGSU, and some of their scholarships do require for you to fill out the Fafsa. So I know sometimes students do ask, like, hey, I have an older sibling, they filed the Fafsa, but they didn't get any money. So again, for some of those scholarships, you may want to. And also last week, as I mentioned during my presentation, I remember BW saying that for work study, they employ students with work study first before they employ anyone else. So they typically give 5 weeks to the work study to kind of get their applications in, and then if they don't receive job applications that time, then they will go with other students that may not have better work study. Also, I do remember myself being a college student, and I always selected that work study option. So for example, in the winter months, if you work on an on-campus job, some departments may not have the funds to pay for you during winter break because that's considered their off time. It's typically considered like there's no students on campus, so why do we need a student employee? Well, some departments will hire you if you have that work study for the winter months. So that is just another thing that I wanted to put out there.
I know if any of you are eligible at LC for the Presidential Trustee or Diversity Incentive Awards, we do ask you, so those are merit-based scholarships, but we do ask you to fill out the FAFSA, because if you can get more money through the federal Pell Grant program, then our scholarship will give you whichever one gives you more money. So we do want to compare, which would be the better option for you.
And I do have that list for our seniors who do qualify for those LC scholarships.
Yeah, I know usually around Thanksgiving, right before Thanksgiving, there's a big meeting at the college that you can go to find out more about those. And I know information about them as well if you've got questions. All right, well, thank you for your attention tonight. This has been great. And